y'all, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. We are real estate elevated, and today I have Nick Hobbs from Alcova Mortgage, who's going to talk about the rent versus own dilemma that we are seeing right now in our market. So we are speaking directly to anybody that falls in that category, but specifically you first-time home buyers or folks who maybe are sitting on the fence or have even been renting for years and just feel like you can't make that next step. So Nick is going to break down a couple of different myths from facts, and then also just talk about the options and the goals that we want to accomplish with home ownership. So Nick, thank you so much for being here today.
Glad to be here.
We are excited to kind of just jump right into this. So guys, this may end up being a two-parter with how much we have to cover. So we'll just kind of see where this ends up. But Nick, give us a little bit of background. So give us credence to what you do and how you got into this industry.
So I've been a mortgage loan officer for 10 years now, and I've seen a few highs and a few lows in the market by now. And I have a particular passion for first-time home buyers. I've always wanted, in mortgage, I've wanted to make a good living, but I've also wanted to make a difference. And the best place to make a difference is earliest in life as possible. And so I love working with first-time home buyers, making arguably the largest financial decision of their lives. Perhaps with the exception of getting married and having a kid, this is the biggest investment you'll ever make. It's the most important decision you make in your 20s other than that. So it's something I just have a passion for and love to be involved in.
Absolutely. So obviously we get asked all the time, when do you talk to your loan officer? When do you talk to your real estate agent? Which one comes first? And honestly, guys, one of the biggest facets, whether it's this one versus this one that's first, is just getting after it and talking to someone and getting the ball rolling and getting the process started. So we'll tap into that a little bit more here at the end, but let's go ahead and just launch into, we constantly get asked about rent versus own. I feel like I'm just going to commit to being a rental person for the rest of my life because I just don't see any light at the end of the tunnel.
There's a lot of reasons people give me for that. Why they're still renting. One of them would be, well, I want to make sure that I have some stability here in the city.
Yes,
that's a good argument. If you know you're going to leave in a year and 2 years, then okay, maybe you still rent. But if you're settling down, whether you have the permanent job or not, if you're settling down and committing to an area, you should seriously be considering starting to look for a house and make this big step forward. And then we're going to get into why for sure.
So let's talk about a couple of myths. And I know that you have some great points that you want to talk about today, but a big one that I hear in my industry is interest rates. So about a year ago, they went a little higher than maybe what we've seen in the previous years.
April of last year, they jumped up like crazy.
Exactly. So it kind of put people on their heels for a little bit. And we definitely saw an impact in our market as far as buyer tenacity or even listings and how quickly they were moving. So now that stutter step is kind of over and interest rates are kind of here to stay at this rate. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I hear that all the time.
So first of all, I'd like to point out that if you happen to Google a 30-year historical chart of interest rates, there is a long-term trend downwards with the spike up in April of last year. And what will they do afterwards? No one knows. I don't know. You don't know. If anyone really did know, they could invest very well and become rich very quickly. But no one knows. We can't account. We can try to look at charts and chart things out, but it's not going to account for wars, pandemics, elections, what the Fed decides to do. They could go in either direction, depending on any number of factors that are so far over my head that I just don't even try. So I just try to get people to make good financial decisions, regardless of what's going to happen to interest rates. And on the interest rate topic, the first thing I usually point out to people when they say this is, number one, if you're waiting for lower rates, why? You're waiting because it's a 30-year commitment. I'm going to have a loan for a long time. Not so. You can refinance. And there shouldn't be a stigma about refinancing and it being a bad thing. Yes, you pay closing costs again. Minimum, let's say you pay about $3,500 in closing costs. Generally, and I ran the math on this a few days ago, if you lower your rate, let's say you can refinance at some point, and you lower your rate by 0.5%, it will take right at 24 months for your savings from that lower rate to exceed the cost of refinancing. What if you lower your rate by 1%? You go from 6.25 to 5.25, 1 year, 12 months, and you've made your money back. And from then on, you're in the green. Refinancing shouldn't be a reason, or waiting for rates to come down shouldn't be a reason to wait to buy a house, especially when the alternative is renting. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So if you think about your rental expenditure, so it's going into your landlord's down payment of their mortgage versus you paying down your own property. So
it's inflation is at the core of all of this.
Oh, absolutely. So another thing that we often hear in our industry is I'm waiting for the perfect time to buy. And there's so many different avenues on that.
Timing the market. Real estate goes up, it goes down, but over time, which way does it go, everybody? It goes up. It always has, unless you have, you know what, we're going to get into this in a little bit, but unless you have a housing bubble that pops, it's going to keep going up. And that's, again, the result of inflation. But in a highly inflationary market, what people need to realize is that even if house prices were to, so first of all, inflation, cost of everything rising. The question is not whether house prices are going to go down. It's more likely the question is how fast are they going to go up compared to everything else. There's houses could fall in real terms or in nominal terms. Nominal means number, so in dollar terms, do I expect that houses are going to go down in dollar terms? I do not. Could houses potentially fall in relation to a gallon of milk? Possibly. But again, it's not a reason to wait.
Yeah. And I think something else when people think about the whole waiting process, right? So doing nothing and then trying to go from 0 to 100 and buy that house. So
you'll
not
probably
doing
be thinking about doing that at the exact same time that everyone else is thinking about doing that. And that's what happened during COVID, and no one could get a house. Like, well, you could, but I tried to get one. I made an offer on a house that was, I think it was like $20,000 or $30,000 over list price with an appraisal addendum, meaning like an appraisal, it didn't matter what it appraised for. I was still going to commit to it. Sight unseen. I wasn't even going to go in the thing, and I still lost. I still lost that house to somebody else, probably a cash investor. But everyone had this thought at the same time: house prices are great, interest rates are low. Let's do it. And I couldn't get my house. So you don't want to wait for the perfect market necessarily. You're going to be competing against everybody.
Well, and it's understanding the data too, right? So I had a conversation with somebody once in talking about inventory, because supply and demand, right? And so he noticed that the inventory had increased maybe this time this year versus this time last year. But something we had to talk about was the number of buyers that affect that level of inventory. So if you have more buyers now, there's still fewer houses than there would have been a year ago. So when you have a location like the Triangle where we have more and more people who are moving here, more and more industries that are planting their manufacturing hubs or their office space, the growth is going to be exponential, meaning the housing market will get stronger. So you're going to see appreciation continue to climb. You're going to see the average home price continue to climb. At what rate? We don't necessarily know that for certain here.
Hard to say, possible to say.
The best time to buy a house is probably yesterday. The second best is today, right?
And one way to look at it is not trying to time the market and look at charts and everything and look at interest rates. It's cash flow. Can you afford this, and how does this line up with the rent that you're paying? Look at it logically from that point of view instead of trying to be the savviest investor of all time. Just look at your two options: rent, own, and make the right choice the best choice as soon as you can. As soon as it's feasible.
Yeah, so you kind of tapped into something else, is the folks who say, I can't afford to buy anything, because they imagine, because there's this stereotype that you still need 20% in order to buy a house. And obviously we're talking about PMI is probably where that whole concept started. However, guys, PMI, private mortgage insurance, we can talk about that another day. But with that whole concept of the 80-20 rule, people think, okay, I'm not ready yet. I don't have 20% of the size of home that I'm wanting to buy.
There's no need to wait till you have 20% down. If you do have 20% down, great. If you don't, that's still fine, and you're better off buying a house with less than 20% down than you are renting for another 5 years while you save up that money. Think about I'm just thinking about all the ways that you can buy a house without your 20% down. First and favorite method, a USDA loan. That requires no down payment at all as long as you're buying a house in a rural area. And guess what? All the new construction, like neighborhoods that are getting built, they're all outside of like the Raleigh city limits. They're already in rural areas for the most part. So that works. You just have to be under the income limit and have a decent credit score, and you're good. There's also there's down payment assistance in North Carolina housing. I checked their interest rates today. It's like 6.375%. Not bad by today's rates. You can get a $15,000. It's kind of like a forgivable loan that's forgiven in 11 to 15 years. But you have that rate for that long. You're given $15,000 towards your down payment and closing costs. And the lady I talked to this morning, she's going to be able to buy a house with no money out of pocket, maybe $100 because of that. So there's USDA, there's down payment assistance. There's my second favorite would be working within your family unit. Working with your family. If you need money for down payment, these people love you. They want you to succeed in life. Ask your grandparents. Do ask. At least allow them to say no. You know, that people from other countries, when they come here, we see this all the time in lending. People from other countries, other cultures, they work together as a family and they get things done much quicker generationally than we do. You know, we kick our kids out at 18 and we all have tons of student loans. A lot of these families are living together, working together, supporting each other. You know, was it My Big Fat Greek Wedding? One of these movies, they like gave them a house next door, you know, something like that. Yeah. So ask your family for help. Yeah.
I think it boils down to real estate's one of the best investments that you can make, right?
Yes.
So I know you have some great statistics, and I want to give you the opportunity to break that down. So guys, as you're following along, I know some of you are listening in podcast form here, but as you're listening and watching, those numbers are going to flash on the screen for you so that you can really follow along. Because some of us, and myself included, are visual people and need to see those numbers. So I'm going to let you go after this because this is some gold nuggets right here.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to say this multiple times throughout this little speech here. These numbers are powerful. In fact, they're so powerful that for the last 2 months, I've spent every single Saturday for at least 4 hours in a park near my house, talking to people at a table, handing out snacks and drinks just to get potential renters to talk to me about these numbers so that they can understand the power in these numbers. Okay, I'm going to start. All right. The place to start is how much does rent cost in Raleigh? I looked this up recently on Zillow and another site. For an apartment, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, let's say it's for a young family, it's average about $1,800 a month. And then for a house, it would be about $2,000 a month. Now, for my numbers, I split the difference. I went with $1,900 a month. Let's just say that for a starter home or apartment renting, you're paying $1,900 a month. Okay. In 2019, rent went up 3%. That's not that bad. In 2020, it was 1.8%. And in 2021, everyone remembers this is kind of in the thick of it with COVID, and we printed a bunch of money, gave it to a lot of people to try to help stimulate the economy. Well, rent went up 20.8% in 1 year. People felt that one. And then 2022, it was 4.9%. And 2023, you know, the numbers don't come out till later, but I spent 2 weeks ago calling around all the apartment complexes I could find in one weekend, and I was told everything between 5% and 13% as to how much they're raising or trying to raise rent by from 2022 to 2023. Wow. So we're talking about everything between like 13%. I mentioned a year where it went up 20%. I'm going to make these numbers make sense in a second here. Okay. I built a spreadsheet where I can compare renting to owning over 10 years at whatever inflation rate, price appreciation that you enter in. And let's just, for this example, I used 5%. Mind you, if you go Google what our current inflation rate is, it's closer to 8%. And it has been for a little while now. And if you really want to get into the weeds on this topic and you look at how the consumer price index and inflation used to be measured before they started tinkering with the weights and measurements, if we used, let's say yesteryears, if we used 2020's consumer price index, then we would be in double-digit inflation right now. But they come up with reasons as to why they should change this pie chart. And so they say inflation is like 8%, but if you look at your grocery bill and how much it's gone up, it probably has gone up a little bit higher than 8%. So that matters in this conversation, okay? So if you compare $1,900 a month in rent to a starter home, let's say I picked out $350,000 starter home with a conventional loan, just 5% down payment, like your average center-of-the-road mortgage that a young family might get. And you apply 5% inflation, and let's say the mortgage has a 6.25% interest rate, which is kind of average right now. I'm just trying to go for average. In this situation, the person who buys a house will have a mortgage payment that is about $600 a month higher than the person renting at $900 a month. That sounds like it's going to be a bit of a burden, but I'm going to get into why it shouldn't be, or it doesn't have to be. Okay, in 10 years, okay, let's start with what equity is. Equity is the difference between what your house is worth and what you owe on it. So if you have a 5% inflation rate, your house is going up in value every year by 5%. At the exact same time, the rent, hypothetically, is also going up every year by about that same margin, about 5%. I looked at what happens after 10 years as to how much that house is worth after 10 years and how much the renter has been paying. And I added up all the rent they've paid and I added up all the mortgage payments the owner has paid, assuming a 5% inflation rate. The owner will be ahead by $273,000 after 10 years. This has happened to me. I bought my house at 165 10 years ago. So this example is real for me. It is currently worth about 340, and in 10 more years, I expect it to darn near double again unless inflation goes a little faster, which I think it will. That's one of the reasons why I feel such a pressure to get out there and talk to people now and try to wake people up to this, because if housing used to be, I could see a reason why housing could become the most important financial decision you make, because what if inflation keeps going higher? This is a way to protect yourself from it. Okay, so back to this. In 10 years, the owner is ahead by $273,000. Okay. Now, there's a few other things we can add to this number, how much the owner's ahead by. Most people take the standard deduction, but some people like myself, I had a lot of medical expenses last year. I had a surgery done, so I actually itemized my deductions on my tax return. And mortgage interest is tax deductible. The rent you're paying is not. If you fall in the kind of middle of the road tax bracket for first time home buyers, maybe 22 to 24% tax bracket, that's another $43,000 in mortgage interest that you can add to that, how much the owner is ahead by after 10 years. So, and then another little fun number I ran was, okay, remember I said that rent went up by 20.8% in 2021 and house prices also skyrocketed at that same time? It was the result, arguably, of our reaction to a pandemic and the money we infused into the economy. If that happened again, let's say you buy a house this year and that happened again. So you buy a $350,000 house this year, and then you have one more year next year, 2024, with 20.8% inflation. You would add another $117,000 to the amount that the owner is ahead by compared to the renter.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. Okay. And then we talk about refinancing a little bit. If you could refinance your mortgage, that $350,000 house at 6.25, if you could drop that to 5.25 next year after you buy a house this year, that would add another $29,500 to how much you're ahead of the renter by. If you start stacking these numbers up, the opportunities provided to you by being a homeowner as opposed to a renter, they start adding up quickly. And then there's my absolute favorite topic to get into when it comes to young people deciding to become a homeowner. And that is the economic opportunities, the financial opportunities to have a second income because you own a house, which is when I bought my house, I could barely afford the thing. I was paying $650 a month in rent. I was making nothing, and I was so stressed out. When I bought my house, I did so. My mortgage payment was much higher than my rent, but I knew I was going to get a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and I was going to rent out 2 rooms in that house. And that's exactly what I did.
Yep.
And as soon as I moved in and had 2 of my friends move in with me, their combined rent paid for my mortgage payment. 2 renters usually will pay for most, if not all, of a mortgage payment. That's just, at least it'll pay for the principal and interest. So I went from paying rent to living rent-free in my own house overnight. That's huge. Then it took me 6 years to discover Airbnb, which is my favorite topic to talk about when it comes to first-time home buyers. My rooms, I live in the same house still. I still have that house. Each of my 2 spare bedrooms would rent for maybe $600-700 a month right now. With Airbnb, each of these rooms makes me upwards of $1,100 a month. And so there's a lot of people have hesitations about Airbnb. Airbnb is amazing. They have an insurance policy. If somebody steals or damages your stuff, you tell them and they pay for it. It's so easy. You can set your rules. I have no kids under 10. I have no pets allowed, no noises. I got all these rules I've set up. People have to follow the rules, and if they don't, I can ask them to leave. You can be strict. I'm fairly strict. I have a near perfect rating with hundreds of reviews on Airbnb. It's so easy. It's kind of like Uber. Both people get rated. The person, staying in your place and you get rated. I'm a pretty friendly guy. People tend to like me. So Airbnb has been a godsend. I absolutely love it. Now let's add some of those numbers into the numbers I was just mentioning. If you take one room in that situation, so $1,100 a month, and you apply the same logic of a 5% appreciation per year for inflation, then over 10 years, that's another $210,000 that the owner has that the person living in an apartment doesn't have access to. So if you do like I do, and you rent out 2 bedrooms in your, well, there's a $420,000 that you are now ahead. If you start stacking this up, you're between the $500,000 and $700,000 ahead of the renter after 10 years range. It's like I said, These numbers are powerful. This is something a renter cannot do, has no access to. You can't. I mean, I've heard of a few people who live in an apartment and do Airbnb, but you're not about to put what's it called, like a digitized padlock on there where you type a code in. A lot of these apartment complexes, they don't want people subleasing without. You would know probably more about this than I do. Apartment complexes have issues with people subleasing without telling them. Airbnb is more restrictive in an apartment complex. With your house, you have all the control in the world. And you don't have to do Airbnb all the time. Here's a misconception about Airbnb. A lot of people say, hey, don't you have to leave your house when the guests show up? No. You can rent out your whole place if you want to, if you're going on vacation or something. I live in my house. I live in the master bedroom. I got 2 guest bedrooms, and that's what they rent out. I'm there all the time. So Airbnb is amazing.
So it sounds like there's multiple opportunities for success here and multiple opportunities to build wealth. And that's kind of the moral of the story, guys, between what Nick is saying and what I'm saying. Investing in real estate can get you really far ahead. All right, y'all, thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like, share, and follow us on Instagram as well as YouTube. We're also on Apple Podcasts. Again, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate.